It's a cold fall afternoon, and you're visiting a city with 4 sports dynasties. Franchises that have won 40 championships over the years, including NBA, NFL, MLB, and NHL titles. Grit and passion for winning in an air in one of North America's oldest cities. Its nickname, Beantown, goes back to colonial times when it was a major stop on a trade route from the Caribbean that brought a steady supply of molasses, which gave birth to a popular dish. As you walk, you're in awe of its beauty. Its modest hills and deep harbor means most of the city has access to boardwalks and beaches, which provide breathtaking views of the Atlantic Ocean and city skyline. It is also surprisingly small for how large of a role it played in history. After all, you're walking in what was considered the birthplace of the American Revolution and one of the earliest centers of American culture, which has influenced the country for over 300 years. You look out into the harbor, and you see your next destination, a series of small islands dotting the horizon. You make sure to watch your head when you enter the secret passageway. You keep your hand on the wall in the dark tunnel. As you enter the corridor of dungeons, you're extra careful. It's dark, so you turn on a flashlight as you squeeze through the small window at the top of the stairs. Your heartbeat quickens as you take your next steps on the uneven floor. And then, a scream chokes in your throat when you hear a woman's voice call out from the dark.
Don't come in here.
Hi, I'm Nadine Bailey, and this is Haunted Canada. In this episode, we travel south of the border to Boston to share a story from one of George's Island's most famous residents. This is the tale of the Lady in Black. George's Island is small, only 53 acres of lush trees and grassy hills. It sits at the entrance of Boston Harbour and for centuries served as a military and naval vantage point. It is one of 34 islands and peninsulas which make up Boston Harbour's national and state park. Ships hoping to enter Boston had to pass George's Island through the Narrows, a shipping channel that extends from Nantusket Roads northwest to President Roads. Fort Warren is shaped like a pentagon, and its cold, granite walls stand in stark contrast to the lush trees that conceal it. The island is peaceful and a welcome reprieve from the noise of the city. And as you walk to the fort, the sound of the squawking seagulls and rustling trees surround you. Indigenous people first inhabited the island and used it in the summertime for fishing. During the War of 1812, the British Royal Navy effectively controlled much of the United States coastline, including the eastern seaboard and Gulf Coast. When the war ended in 1815, the defense of harbors and ports became a priority for the federal government under President James Madison. By 1825, the city of Boston purchased the island from its owner, Caleb Rice, grandson of Revolutionary-era loyalist Elijah Leavitt, who had owned the island since 1765. Over the next several decades, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built a seawall to prevent the island's erosion, and by 1832 had surveyed the land on which the fortifications would stand. Around this time, it became known as Fort Warren, in honor of Revolutionary War hero Joseph Warren, killed in action at Bunker Hill in 1775. The battle only lasted 2 hours, but hundreds of British soldiers and colonial militant fought and died in what became the first major battle of the American Revolution. Joseph Warren famously sent Paul Revere on his midnight ride to warn that the British were coming, inspiring Henry Wadsworth Longfellow to pen the famous poem Paul Revere's Ride about this important part of American history. By the 1840s, the Army had begun construction on Fort Warren in earnest, using granite from nearby quarries to build its truly imposing fortifications. As James Lloyd Homer, a contemporary writer for the Boston Post, wrote in 1845, quote, "As far as the fort is finished, it is probably the most magnificent piece of masonry in this or in any other country. The foundation walls of which are 12 feet thick and the superstructure 8. The fronts are neatly hammered and the workmanship is as even and as perfect as it could possibly be." End quote. Although the thick stone walls of Fort Warren may have been imposing, it only had one single cannon mounted atop its walls. By 1850, Fort Warren was almost finished, though the Corps of Engineers continued to work on the fortifications for the next decade. Just as the construction of Fort Warren was nearing completion, the Confederate Army attacked Fort Sumter in April 1861 to kickstart the American Civil War. For the first time in its history, Fort Warren was staffed by a garrison of troops made up of 300 guns and 1,000 to 2,000 soldiers. Throughout 1861, Massachusetts volunteer regiments trained and passed through Fort Warren on their way to the front lines in the South. Colonel Francis Jewett Parker wrote after the war that, quote, "Such duty on a bleak island, exposed to the terrible cold and storms of a New England winter, was no pastime. Occasionally, some of the outposts would be untenable by reason of the dash of waves, and often inspection and relief of the posts was effected with great difficulty because of the icy condition of the ground. In the most severe storms, the guard was replaced by patrols, each of 2 men who walked the line, one patrol being dispatched every 15 or 20 minutes." End quote. Over the course of the war, Fort Warren was integral in protecting Boston Harbor from potential Confederate naval attacks. Around 1864, Fort Warren became a prison camp for both Confederate prisoners of war and political prisoners. Throughout the war, 2,300 captives were held within its walls, and conditions were good compared to other prisons. The most infamous prisoner of them all was Alexander H. Stephens, Vice President of the Confederacy. He wrote in his diary, quote, "I was alone. A coal fire was burning. A table and a chair were in the center. A narrow iron bunk-like bedstead with a mattress and a covering was in a corner. The floor was stone, large square blocks. The door was locked. For the first time in my life, I had the full realization of being a prisoner." End quote. Like other prisoners, Stephen was well treated and enjoyed walks around the grounds and had a good relationship with the fort's commander at the time. That's because the fortifications were so imposing and unbroken that no one had successfully escaped. But it wasn't without trying. The most dramatic and daring attempt happened in August 1863, when 6 officers and sailors of the recently captured CSS Atlanta escaped. 2 drowned, 2 were caught right away, and 2 made it as far as the Maine coastline before they were recaptured. The final Confederate prisoners were released early in 1866, and Fort Warren's service during the Civil War came to an end. But before it did, the fortress was a setting for the final act between 2 star-crossed lovers. This story begins just as the Civil War broke out in 1861. Reports differ on the name, but Lieutenant Samuel, or Andrew, Lanier, was a Confederate soldier from Georgia. We will refer to him as Samuel. He was an officer in the Confederate Army, and so he wore a gray wool coat with ornate gold buttons and trimmings, along with gray or blue trousers and leather brogans, a boot that covered the entire foot up to the ankle that was often lifted and fitted with strips of metal on the heels to reduce wear. 2 gold horizontal bars on his collar signified his rank. The Confederate and the South's decision to withdraw from the Union during the Civil War was slavery and states' rights. These motives played a part in the lives of Confederate soldiers like Lanier, and many men his age joined the cause and in the process left loved ones behind. Samuel had been courting a young woman by the name of Melanie, who was heartbroken, knowing she might not see him again once he left for battle. The young couple decided to marry before Samuel shipped out. They had only been married a few months before Samuel was captured by the North. It was early in the war when Samuel was allegedly taken prisoner, along with a large number of troops from Roanoke Island, North Carolina. We don't know for sure when this story took place, but Roanoke Island was not taken by Union General Ambrose Burnside's expedition until February 8, 1862. So we can guess that Samuel was taken to Fort Warren around that time. Somehow, soon after, Samuel managed to get a message to his young bride, Melanie. The note was smuggled out of the highly fortified prison and delivered through battlefields over 1,100 miles away in Georgia. Upon learning of her husband's capture, Melanie was devastated. Once she composed herself, fierce determination crystallized as she vowed to free Samuel. With unwavering resolve, Melanie meticulously crafted a daring escape from the impenetrable walls of Fort Warren. Melanie's first step was to book passage from Georgia on a schooner destined for Hull, Massachusetts. The small town on a peninsula is the closest land point on the southern edge of Boston Harbor and is only a mile from George's Island. Once in Massachusetts, Melanie took shelter in the home of a Confederate sympathizer. From there, she would venture to the shore to watch guards patrolling the fort with a spyglass. As she spied on the fort, a plan began to take shape. Melanie would disguise herself, break into Fort Warren, and break Samuel out. She sent him a message letting him know of her plans. And so, on a dark and stormy night in late January 1862, the plan was set into motion and there was no turning back. In preparation, Melanie had taken sharp shears to her once beautiful hair. With short hair, she put on a soldier's uniform, hid an old pistol in her pocket, and Melanie, along with two ardent Confederate sympathizers, embarked on their mission. In a small wooden boat, they pushed away from the rocky shore. It was a stormy night as they rowed towards George's Island, their weather-beaten boat swaying in the rough, foggy seas. It was hard to see the dock, but she made it to either the north or south dock, where she hid her boat. Then, under the cover of darkness, convinced she wouldn't be discovered, she ran to the fort's walls and whistled a tune that she and Samuel used to sing together. It was a Confederate tune, and she repeated it louder as she snuck around the demi-lune and through the sally port. Then she walked across the parade ground and over to the prisoners' cells. Melanie waited with bated breath for her husband's response. Eventually, near the secret passageway, she heard the tune repeated back to her from inside the fort walls. She looked to the narrow windows and heard someone say, "Hang on." Suddenly, a rope made of sheets tied together was lowered down. Melanie held on as she was pulled up. Her petite frame allowed her to squeeze through the bars, and on the other side was Samuel's loving face. The couple fell into each other's arms. The loving reunion was short-lived. Time was not on their side, and they would have to move fast to be successful. They had to dig a tunnel beneath the parade ground, and once outside, they would surprise the guards, overpower them to escape. There was only one problem. As the lovers began digging, a guard heard a pickaxe hitting the granite and alerted the officer in charge. Colonel Dimmick sprung into action and cornered the couple. They were trapped. Melanie and Samuel froze under Colonel Dimmick's steely gaze. Melanie had come too far to give up now, and with a trembling hand, she reached into her pocket. She wrapped her fingers around the cold metal of the pistol. She quickly pointed it at the colonel, who was taken by surprise as she demanded their freedom. Colonel Dimmick refused. Melanie aimed and fired. As the smoke cleared, Melanie realized that the old pistol had misfired. The colonel remained standing, but beside her, a fragment of a bullet had pierced Samuel's head, killing him instantly. Melanie fell to the ground and called his name. Her devastation was swiftly interrupted as she was seized and arrested immediately. She was sentenced to death for treason. Melanie only had one request, that she would be allowed to wear a black dress to mourn the death of her husband that she had unwittingly killed. The only fabric soldiers found were curtains hanging in Colonel Dimmick's room. The night before her execution, Melanie sewed a dress, and then the next day, she marched bravely to the gallows. On Sunday, February 2nd, 1862, the crisp winter air bit at Melanie's cheeks as she took measured steps on the frozen ground and up the stairs to her final fate. A black hood matching her newly sewn dress was placed on her head. Then, a coiled rope was placed around her neck. She took one final breath, but no words were uttered. The lever was pulled, and Melanie fell through the trap door to her death. Her lifeless body was taken down and buried underneath the corridor of dungeons. Richard Cassidy had witnessed Melanie's execution. Days later, he was walking to his evening post. He was close to where she had died when suddenly he felt a touch. Confused, he turned around to see a lady wearing all black. He was the first of many to see her. Soldiers experienced chilling accounts of the lady in black. They heard Melanie's voice echoing through the fort, especially in the corridor of dungeons where she's believed to be buried. Soldiers performing nightly patrols often heard a woman calling out from the darkness saying,
"Don't come in here."
Soldiers playing poker to pass the time during long night shifts would often be interrupted by stones gliding across the floor, thrown by an unseen hand. Other soldiers working late at night would see a threatening and angry figure charge at them, causing them to flee in fear. One soldier was so unlucky that in his terror, he claims to have fallen and broken his ankle in its efforts to escape from her icy grip. Many soldiers were so terrified that they abandoned their post and had to be court-martialed. There were some soldiers who instead held their ground and shot their guns towards the lady in black, only to see the bullets go through her and embed themselves on the granite walls. In winter, footsteps would materialize out of nowhere and vanish just as quickly on the pristine, fresh-fallen snow. Reports of the lady in black continue to this day. Employees and visitors to George's Island have seen her swaying in the harbor breeze, standing atop the entrance arches, staring down at those who enter. Her presence is a chilling reminder of the importance Fort Warren had during the Civil War and the risks people are willing to take for those they love. Thank you for joining me on our visit to George's Island in Massachusetts. Haunted Canada is sponsored by the Edmonton Ghost Tours. I will link it in the show notes. Haunted Canada is written and produced by me, Nadine Bailey, with senior producer, Dila Velasquez. Production and sound design is by Rob Johnston, with help from Roslyn Kufer. If you would like to support this podcast, please follow and share. And if you can give us a like and a 5-star written review, that is always appreciated. Also, you can follow me on our different social media platforms, or if you have a ghost story, haunting, or true crime that you would like for us to cover on this podcast, please email me through the website hauntedcanada.com. And thank you to everyone who has taken the time to email me your own story suggestions. I really do appreciate it. Thank you from all of us at Haunted Canada and Curious Cast. Have a good night, everyone, and stay haunted.